Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a podcast in which I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop, RPG, and surrounding space. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Rue Dickey. Hello.
Hello, I'm Rue Dickey, as he just said, and I use they or he pronouns.
Nice. No, thank you very much. I must admit, I think you've kind of actually, and it is as you kind of mentioned it one second. I really should start putting pronouns in my. I've got my little title card at the bottom. You've inspired change already.
Oh, thank you.
No, but no. Well, I guess, Rue, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Let's dive straight into it. For the kind of people listening, then, what have you been making in the past? What have you been throwing out and not throwing out? I think that's a little bit nonchalant of just like, yeah, I'm missing projects akimbo, but
no. D&D wise or like overall?
Oh, overall, within the maybe like within the tabletop RPG space, because I'm aware that you also do. Was it voice acting work?
I do, yeah. So 5th edition wise, I'm a core writer at Action Fiction. So I write for Action Fiction supplements, and our most recent one was Chromatic Gamut, which was an entirely all queer written queer parody setting of New York for D&D. And so I did 5 subclasses and backgrounds and magic items and stuff for that, because that's what I like to do in 5th edition. Is I like to work on like subclasses and magical items and backgroundsy things. Less so like monsters and stuff. I'm not as good at that. And then presently, 5th edition wise, and sort of system agnostic, because we're trying to make it as rules light as possible. I'm currently working as a core writer on the Demiverse, which is a Kickstarter program that's running right now. That is a book that is a collection of demiplanes, because the multiverse shattered, and all that was left is a bunch of little interconnected demiplanes. And there's a total of 50 if we hit all of our stretch goals. Mine is funded, so I will get to write mine no matter what. Nice. But yeah, there's a total of 50 of them. And mine for that project is called the Grand Observatory. And it is a wizard's tower that perpendicularly bisects the demiplanes. And the like wizard who runs it is running a research lab of like taking creatures and from one demiplane and putting them into other ones and seeing how they react. So, because the physics and the magic rules in every demiplane are different.
So like the wizard tower kind of like spans the entire plane.
Yeah.
Wow. Jeez. I mean, yeah. The kind of like the multi like when you get into like demi-planes and like playing off, it's you can get really kind of fun and kind of like wild with them, because anything goes. It's like this is like a wizard or someone creating their own dimension that anything goes kind of within it.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask. So it's interesting. So with the two kind of the New York project you mentioned, and as well as with like Demiverse, it sounds like you're very much involved in like large scale collaborations.
Sometimes, not always. Like I write independent RPGs on my itch account, but those are the only 2 sort of like big projects I've ever been a part of. I like working with large collaborative things, but most of my like indie work is on itch. My most recent project, which I would also argue is my most successful, was for BIPOC Vamp Day. I wrote a game called I Want Your Bite. Nice. Which is essentially the game show, the like reality TV show The Bachelor, but if The Bachelor were a vampire.
Nice.
So all the contestants are like, I have playbooks for different like reality show archetypes.
So is it the case where like it's a bunch of humans who
Yep.
want to get turned into a vampire, and okay.
Yep. So they have to like compete in a series of trials to win the vampires like notice to thus become vampires.
So if you don't mind me asking, so when did you kind of like, I guess like first start kind of writing like 1-page tabletop RPGs, or just starting writing in general?
Writing and publishing stuff about 2 years ago. Prior to that, I was just writing homebrew 5th edition content for like my home campaigns and not doing anything with it. But yeah, I've been writing and publishing stuff for about 2 years.
Nice. No. And what was kind of the first? Because yeah, I guess like what was your kind of first project that you kind of put together?
Oddly enough, the first thing that I did was a powered by the apocalypse system that is free because it is entirely rooted in the world of the Magnus Archives.
Okay.
I wrote a powered by the apocalypse system where the 14 classes are the 14 like entities of the Magnus Archives.
So I must admit, I'm aware of the Magnus Archives. I've not like listened to any. So it's a case of like I can nod and go. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's an investigative horror game based on a horror podcast essentially.
Interesting.
So.
Yeah, I must admit, I do always like. I'm always kind of fascinated by like because I'm really bad with horror. Like I'm squeamish. I just don't kind of deal with it. And I always I see a lot of the kind of I was about to say all the discourse to make it sound really fancy. All the kind
discourse.
The kind of discussion around kind of the way that RPGs and horror kind of intersect. Because it is hard to like if you think about it like in terms of the bare minimum, it is difficult to like give mechanics to fear or horror.
Yeah.
And again, you don't necessarily want the other end of the experience of like where the players at your table are actually horrified. You know?
Oh yeah, that's a huge like so because I run a campaign of my system, which is called Statements of Fear. I run a campaign of it on Heroes Without Limits, which is a tabletop channel for disabled and chronically ill folks. And one of my huge things when I started the campaign was, along with Lines and Veils, I asked everyone their fears and phobias because the game is fear-based. I was like, the last thing I want to do is put any of my players in a situation where they are actually afraid of what they're dealing with.
Like I'm sure there are those tables out there where obviously that everyone's like, yeah, no, I'm here to get scared. Like,
but please scare me.
It's hard to kind of get that balance, and especially when you're kind of designing a game with that kind of at its heart, you kind of need to be aware of the kind of the boundaries.
Yeah.
Well, no, fair. So it sounds like you've kind of worked with like a whole kind of slew of different kind of systems.
Apocalypse systems are my favorite. Like I like the 2d6 system. I think it's really smooth and easy for like especially new players to pick up because sometimes Pathfinder and D&D, all the different dice and all the different rules can be a little bit difficult. Yeah. And also it's easier to write rules for powered by the apocalypse systems because you have so many fewer like constraints to think about.
Yeah.
And then when I do one-page RPGs, I tend to also stick to a 2d6 system. Not the same like apocalypse full like layout, but I like rolling 2d6s and having like a series of like you totally succeeded, you kind of succeeded, or you failed.
I think because I think the kind of it is easier to kind of have those tiers as well as like I mean I've been playing a few kind of systems that kind of use like a dice pool system. But obviously, like depending on like how skilled you are.
Oh, like Vampire.
Yes, I forget the I forget the name of the game that I was playing. But yeah, no, I kind of again, it's kind of interesting that kind of because again, just by virtue of being more skilled at it, and there's less maths involved. It's like
yeah. I love when there's less math involved.
And again, I can definitely see how, especially with like those sort of games, because they kind of lean away to you're like looking for like a set number of successes. Whereas with D&D in particular and some extent like kind of Pathfinder, that kind of arbitrary DC sometimes, because again it falls to the DM, but sometimes it is that case of like for the checks where it's just like it's not written down anywhere. I kind of like, I'm just gonna yeah. No, interesting. So, and I guess to kind of circle back to kind of an earlier point, you mentioned that with D&D in particular, you quite like making subclasses.
Yeah.
What is it about like subclasses that you kind of like?
I think it's because as a DM and a player, I'm a super character-driven person. Like I like character-driven stories, and so I like building subclasses because I like thinking about what a player could do with the like effects of a subclass. And I especially really like subclasses that have non-combat uses, because I feel like so many D&D subclasses are super useful in combat, and then when you're not in combat, everyone's the same
Yeah.
for all their other like tasks. And so I really like expanding subclasses into like non-combat abilities where it's like, oh, you have a druid who like when they're not in combat, they're like because I one of my concepts that I didn't end up writing for Chromatic Gamut, but I had was like a community garden druid.
Okay.
And so like when not in combat, if they're like at a place with gardening, they can like easily get food ingredients and like stuff like that. So like they have an easier time foraging because they are used to growing crops and things like that.
So I must admit, there's definitely like my mind goes straight to like the idea like all those kind of like passive things. They kind of get all like they always get thrown at the ranger, if anything like that, and the other classes don't really kind of get to have that same sort of fun. You did touch on something interesting though, because like okay, so with the Chromatic Gambit, obviously you mentioned it. Is it like a modern day New York setting, or is it like?
It's like not yes and no. It's sort of a weird urban fantasy New York City. So the subway is there because it's important.
Yeah.
But like it's not perfectly like analogous to present day New York.
Yeah, it's like an interpretation, or like it's like yeah. So
yeah,
my kind of question is, so how did you kind of find about like creating subclasses that I guess kind of fit within like a different time zone or different like setting? Because obviously I guess like there are things that some of the subclasses, like I don't know, like I think of like the Swarm Ranger.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that can go anywhere. Like you can just
go anywhere.
Man, or like
cockroaches.
But when you're more aware of like designing for a very particular like I guess like timepiece or like setting, what was like I guess what were some like the design challenges around that?
I think a huge bit of like the difficulty was like sort of keeping a balance of bringing in more modern or like urban fantasy elements while not making it too like this is just normal New York.
Yeah.
One of the things that one of the other things I did was I did a character background that was a queer archivist, because we had like a queer archive and library, and so one of the backgrounds that I made was someone who worked there, and I made a table of like what library field you specialized in, and then I took the list from like the actual like library fields that people can specialize in, and then we changed them to be more like magic oriented and a little bit less bland.
Yeah.
So like information technology became information tech and things like
give
that.
It a little seasoning, a little
like magical spice. Some fun. And then like subclass wise, a lot of it was like thinking about what features wouldn't necessarily be useful in New York.
Okay.
I didn't write our ranger, but the person who did write, or not ranger, yes, I think it was the ranger. The ranger has the preferred terrain, yes. The person who wrote our ranger, wrote a whole new terrain for cityscapes, so that the ranger could have a preferred terrain in New York, because there's not really a desert in New York.
It's funny because I've like heard like before like the like some players or like my own table have kind of complained in like when we were playing like a city-based campaign that rangers don't have like a sort of like city or like
yeah,
and it's like I understand that they are meant to be people of nature, but maybe kind of bring across like the I don't know, like the adapting. They're all about adapting. What I was going to ask then. So, out of the kind of, you mentioned that you had like 6 subclasses.
So I wrote the Blood Hunter, the Monk. So the Blood Hunter was the Blood Hunter was based off of like it's a healing Blood Hunter subclass. I'm forgetting what I've called it off the top of my head now. I mean,
that just through virtue of like when you work on stuff, it's just like there's way too much to kind of keep track of.
But the Blood Hunter was my like passion project for that thing. Like it was my favorite piece because it is based on the fact that like a lot of queer folks are not able to give blood for one reason or another because of outdated and bigoted laws against queer folks being able to give blood to their own community,
Mm-hmm.
and like how a lot of the time, like when there is a content warning, I'm going to mention the Pulse shooting. When there are like serious events like that where 50 people in the queer community get killed or shot, and there's a call for like blood donations because there's been an event, but you can't help your own community because you're not allowed to. And so I based the entire Blood Hunter class that I wrote off of the concept of like using your Blood Hunter powers to heal and like resurrect your teammates.
Yeah.
So that was my favorite to work on. And then
well, I was just gonna say it's kind of really awesome to try and like I guess kind of it like and again you kind of mentioned how like that design of that kind of blood hunter card is very much kind of inspired and kind of draws upon I guess like tackling like a real world problem and it's kind of really nice kind of even within like a D&D subclass to be able to kind of convey this sort of message is kind of really kind of awesome.
Thank you.
Nice. But no, sorry, you were going to say your next one.
Yeah, I did the cleric, which was the domain of pride, and they work almost kind of like they have a similar thing to bardic inspiration where they have a pool of pride dice. And they can add them to their healing, and they can add them to their bless and things like that, so they can up the effects of their like aid spells.
Nice.
And then I did the Way of Vogue monk, which is a monk that can do essentially long distance melee damage using Vogue dancing. So you don't have to actually hit someone to use your monk abilities, as long as you are like actively in, like you spend a key point to go into like Vogue.
But it's kind of fascinating to hear about like what is like both really cool in like a mechanical sense, as well as being kind of supported with the kind of surrounding thematics around it. So I can definitely see why it was kind of like a fun project to kind of work through. Were there any kind of, so out of the kind of 6 subclasses then, I guess like to if the Blood Hunter was kind of like the passion project, were there one that kind of had, I guess, like any kind of mechanical difficulties to kind of get right?
A couple that I like wrote didn't end up getting picked because of mechanical difficulties. I still have them, and they're like mine to do with what I want if I want to use them later.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that I like couldn't quite get figured out was I had a warlock subclass that I'm still working on and I want to release at some point. That is Pact of the Pyramid, and it's where your patron is a multi-level marketing scheme.
But I mean, it was about time, really.
But finding a way to get that across mechanically, I just couldn't like do in a way that felt like useful.
Yeah, because I guess the power again, what power there is in a multi-level marketing scheme is underlings or getting more.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is. I don't think like off the top of my head, I don't think I can think of anything like that. I think it would need a lot of amount of tinkering, because at what point, like, does that mean like even your patron are they the top of the pyramid, or are they like does it go beyond them?
Yeah, I think the way that I was running it was that like the patron was like the like executive, like the CEO of the multi-level marketing scheme, and they've convinced you that like you can become just as powerful as them if you just recruit more people. Like, kind of
campaign arc of like you reach that point where like you're really powerful and you go to like your patron and they're just like, I've been slightly misleading. I need to report to my boss, and it just keeps going. Like it goes back around. Like it's an endlessly in a loop. No, awesome. So I guess as well. So I guess words.
Mood.
I guess segueing from the chromatic gambit and more towards kind of the work of kind of Demiverse, because you mentioned this awesome kind of like wizard kind of plane. What were like, I guess, some of the kind of themes, or like when you were kind of putting your pitch together, what were some of the things that you kind of wanted to capture?
I said this in the last interview I did about the Demiverse, but I need to say it again. I love tieflings.
No.
So my first thought was I want to build a tiefling wizard. Like I want, because we all have a key figure in our demiplane, and instead of building the demiplane first in my brain, I built the wizard first. And so I designed this sort of early middle age tiefling wizard named Vellum, and because the application document gave us a little bit of background about the Demiverse as a whole, and how the universe fractured about 200 years ago, so that we'd know how much space to think about for pitching our demiplane. So it's not like my person's been here for 4,000 years or anything like that. And I thought about how if I were a morally dubious wizard, I'm
not currently.
I'm not presently.
But if I were.
If I were a morally dubious wizard, and the universe kind of imploded shortly before I came to the height of my wizard ability, I could think of nothing more than wanting a place where I can examine every possible outcome of this universe fracturing and see which places got the best result versus the worst result, and how they all affect each other. And originally when I pitched it, I called it a panopticon, because that's what the actual term for them is in towers and prisons and places. It's the central spire through which there are windows where you can see everyone. But when I actually got into writing the fuller proposal, I didn't want it to be so grim in its concept, because it's not a prison tower, it's just a research facility, which has its own moral dubious things.
It's a different brand,
different brand of moral quandary. But yeah, so I originally pitched it as the panopticon, a centralized point that can see in all directions, essentially.
And that's one of the coolest things about, again, to talk more about the funness of demiplanes, particularly knowing that you're setting within a world that is a bunch of fractured, having these kind of planes that are connecting bridges that always kind of looks outward, kind of again better cements the idea that this is a world of many worlds.
Another one that is similar to mine in that it connects to all of them is the Derelict Station, which is a train station where you can take little trains across all eras. So it's got modern bullet trains all the way to coal-powered steam engines from the 1800s, and you can take them to any given number of demiplanes. So your DM can have you take a train to any demiplane you want, essentially.
It's kind of nice to hear the people who go you know what, my plane is going to be focused on supporting other planes. We have the transportation plane.
Yeah. Welcome to Grand Central Station, the demiplane.
Yeah. And so the one thing again, so I've run into a few problems in kind of my home world building when I'm doing anything to do with powerful wizards. Because once you start messing around with powerful wizards, it's it gets to the point of okay, well, they have access to all these spells. They can endlessly clone themselves if they want to. What does that mean? What does it mean? What is their day-to-day like? Are they still what are some of the challenges of this being is so powerful? What limits or what do I do?
I think part of that is helpful in that the universe itself is kind of limiting, because not only the prime material plane fractured, but so did all of the other planes. And so the celestial plane is not as powerful, the ethereal plane is not as powerful as they used to be. And so in my personal, because every demiplane is written differently, but I've taken that to mean that the weave that wizards draw their power from, as everyone does, is also less powerful than it would be in a fully whole universe. And so less essentially being a demigod by the time you're level 20, as just having a lot more control and being able to work a lot better with the limited magics that you have. But also sort of in like a more of an ethos standpoint, like Vellum is still very involved in like the day-to-day operations of the tower because they're a wizard and they don't trust anyone else to do the work better than them.
That's fair.
So like in this sort of like when you've got a really overbearing boss who founded your company kind of way, and they're like, I'm sure you can do this very simple project, but I'm gonna watch you do it because I could do it better.
Yeah. It's the day of like they spend the first morning like delegating jobs, and then the rest of the day it's overseeing the delegation.
Yeah.
So then I guess was there any kind of, obviously I guess this is the point of like, obviously because Kickstarter's still going, it's not been like fully written yet, it's kind of still dealing with kind of like the kind of concepts and
yeah.
I guess my kind of visual is like, so once you actually begin to kind of write up the process, do you have any like plans to try and like pull in content from like some of the other, like obviously because that big part of Vellum is the fact that they are like, I don't know why, but I just imagine they're just getting two creatures from two different demi-planes, putting them within like a ring together and just
essentially
yeah,
see what happens.
Yeah.
So we have a list of everyone's concepts that we have access to. And not all of those will necessarily be funded. I hope they all get funded during the Kickstarter, but not all of them necessarily will. But because Adam wants this to feel like as big of a universe as possible, we are allowed to reference demiplanes that don't necessarily have full like 6-page descriptions written up yet.
Yeah.
And like for my demiplane specifically, I'm going through a lot. Like I'm going through the ones that have been selected, and like I have like 5 to 10 that I really want to reference. And so I'm going to like keep my fingers crossed that those ones get funded, because then you can use the tower as a transport place to also get to those demiplanes if it actively has like a portal open to those at the time. But yeah, so a lot of the ones that I'm picking are sort of the ones that are like, because they're all like really fascinating, but I've picked the ones that are like weirder, quote unquote.
So again, from like a research standpoint, they're kind of they're a lot, So, interesting. So then I guess pull back a little bit. So from any kind of individual project, and more about like your creative process as a whole. Do you have like a particular way that you go about starting each project, or?
I tend to write my personal projects in fugue states. I will be struck with an idea, and I simply have to write it, and I won't be able to do anything else until I've finished it, which can be very problematic if I'm working on a personal project while I'm also doing a contract project. But yeah, and then from there, I generally write like a bare bones rules outline first.
Okay.
And then once I've got that down, I will, depending on if it's like a 1-pager, I'll write the narrative flow around it, or if it's something bigger, like a full system with characters, I will build the subclasses or classes or however they work, and then I will go back in and I'll fill in the narrative structure.
Is there any reason why you feel like they're kind of like it works best to kind of start from the mechanical kind of skeleton first?
It helps like me personally keep myself organized, because it'll rein in my need to, like, I want to give so many more like abilities and like things to characters, but they won't necessarily need them. And so if I have a basic like rules outline of these are the things that characters need to overcome, then I can gear the abilities and the checks and things to what those obstacles are. And then it keeps me from just kind of wandering in the weeds.
Yeah. And does that kind of process differ at all when it's like, again, because you mentioned like when you're trying to like capture the lightning of like an idea that's like, again, got you really inspired versus, again, the kind of contracted work, is it still very much the kind of same process, or does it kind of?
It depends what I'm doing, like contract work wise, but a lot of the time I will still do like basic mechanics first, and then I will go in and fill in the flavor text and the why. But like I like to sort of have the idea of like, oh, okay, this ability at this level gives you this.
Mm-hmm.
And then think back of like, but why does it give you that? And then flesh it out from that point.
No, interesting. And then again, it kind of segues nicely into kind of your favorite and least favorite part of the process. I'm going to go on a hunch because so recently I've kind of gone through and kind of collated all the responses of all the designers I kind of spoke to. And it was kind of like number one, like again, for people, the ideas phase of like, again, when you get struck by lightning in the nicest sense. And then sometimes, typically, if that's their favorite part, the other and least favorite part is kind of the finishing, or where the lightning runs dry. Does that sound at all relatable? Anyway.
Yeah. I think for me, the favorite is the ideas phase, definitely. And like my least favorite is like very specifically the part at the end where I have almost everything finished and I like there's like one subclass or one mechanic that I just can't get to feel like it meshes very well with the others.
Yeah.
And I spend 3 days rewriting the same like 4 paragraphs until it works. And then sometimes for me, the other like part that I really enjoy is I do, for my independent projects, I do my own layout work.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like doing layout and design and stuff. So like I generally push myself through that last, I hate writing this section with the notion that once I'm done with this part that I can't write, I will get to open an Affinity Publisher document and start putting these things in very nice, organized, pretty boxes.
So like a little bribe, just like
yeah, like no, we're so close.
There is, I don't know what it is about like the layout process. At least like the way I do it is like a weirdly kind of like therapeutic process of like again you I don't know what it is. It's like moving stuff from box to box.
It's I don't know if you've seen, there is a Brian David Gilbert video that's like very surrealist about being his own boss and moving things from spreadsheet to spreadsheet and how satisfying it is.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, well, like he keeps getting money for no reason whatsoever, as long as he keeps moving things. Yeah.
And that's how I feel doing layout, moving things from my Google Doc into my Affinity Doc.
It's I must say so I'm funny enough. I'm right. Literally, as of yesterday, I was going through the process of layout on like a new project, and my first thing is always like I get all the text across, and then it's that case of like I fight with the text for a little bit, and then the images come in, and that's when I fight more. It's kind of fun because then it feels more like a finished project, and it's kind of again it's just move kind of that finish line gets closer and closer with each kind of moment. That's without any kind of like affinity or like, you know, homebrewery or any sort of like finagling, or because it's never, again, it's fun. And then there's like one point where you're just like, oh, this table is looking a little funky.
The endless struggle of like, do I move this 3 degrees to the left?
Yeah, my one is like sometimes I'm always like do I break up this paragraph so it doesn't split across like I don't like hanging paragraphs. Like if it's on one column, I will do what I can to make whatever it works. I will move it, the earth and sun. if
I will change the font sizes to like 11.9 instead of 12.
That's sneaky. I hadn't thought about that.
Or I'll change the line spacing to like 1.15.
So is there any kind of like part of the layout process that you kind of like particularly enjoy, or is it just kind of the overall kind of reaching that stage of the project that you enjoy?
My day job is a graphic design and marketing position.
Mm-hmm.
So when I get to do things in layout, it's just kind of like, it's almost like automatic process for me at this point. And so part of it is like that it's really soothing, and I can essentially just do it with like a podcast playing or like music playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to think about every like word that I put into the sentence. But also, I just really love seeing things stop looking like I've word vomited into a Google Doc and actually start looking like I've made something meaningful.
Yeah, it's wonderful the power of like, you know, a formatted table can do from like the
Yeah.
I have the habit though, because even in Word docs I do this effort where like I change the cell color. Like
Ooh, yeah.
I do. It's like this is the Word doc. Like this
Beautiful.
is going in the final thing. It means nothing, but for me, it's like, oh, there you go. That looks nice.
It's more done.
it's somehow more done. I can't move the table across. That's not a feature that I have to literally. But for me, yeah.
Oh, and Microsoft Word, if you try to move one image, you'll break the whole document.
No, I'm convinced people who use like Microsoft Word for like their layout and stuff like that, I think they're on like a whole other level. I think they're beyond skilled and talented. Like,
I have a friend who uses PowerPoint for all of their like game layouts, and I'm like, you are a god tier individual.
That's the thing. I've kind of like heard things like but it is kind of like dealing with like shapes and it is easier in PowerPoint. Like,
oh, then Word definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it go whatever your tool is, you know, find what works. If it's PowerPoint, if it's, you know, just do what works.
Yeah.
So next question then is more generally about like, over everything you've kind of done, has there been like a particular design choice that you've made that you've been, you know, like you look back on going, hey, kind of hit the nail with that one?
Did that one. One of my like one-page RPGs that like doesn't get as much traction because it's small is I wrote a one-pager called The Season, which is a like a GM-less game about being a bunch of gossiping Regency-era people who just sit around and drink tea and gossip about each other.
So and did you include like a rule set for how to gossip? Is that
yeah?
Okay.
There is a gamified like you have stats that are like I think it's like wealth, like presence, and like connections.
Mm-hmm.
And you use those to gossip, but if someone else makes a particularly striking comment towards your like reputation, you can lose points in those scores. And so it's essentially just like a battle of gossiping, and there's like a gamified thing for like, because there's no GM, the like party votes on how like good a piece of gossip is, and if your character believes it or not.
Yeah. So my question is, so how do you go about how do you go about like generating gossip? Did you like include like potential like tables to kind of draw inspiration from, or was it more just like?
I think I gave examples. I don't think I did like a full table.
Yeah, I guess it's that case of like gossip of this vein, you know, like, oh, you wouldn't believe who I saw coming out of X shop, or
because I think I gave examples of gossip for each like stats, like gossip that would draw from each stat. So like for your wealth stat, if you wanted to like cut someone's wealth, you'd be like, oh, I hear they had to sell their summer home for to keep up their London house.
Yeah. So I get what was the kind of like inspiration from that game? Was it like, were you watching like period dramas of that?
I during quarantine, my partner read all of Jane Austen's books. And then they wanted to watch all of the like various adaptations that like the BBC had done and like movie studios had done. So we ended up watching like 4 different versions of Pride and Prejudice and like 3 Sense and Sensibilities. And so I was just we just had like a couple of weeks where we just lived in a Regency like bubble. I was like, this would be fun to do for tabletop for like 2 hours.
You can it's kind of funny because you can definitely see how like if you were in that kind of like that what's the term, like that media bubble, how a game like, you know, like the season, it would come, it's just like, again, that's if that's all you're consuming, again, that's the game that you would make.
Yeah.
So was it kind of like was it literally once it kind of all clicked in terms of like the gossiping, was that kind of the moment that kind of
yeah.
No, awesome.
It was really, because I had been like playing with the idea of it, and I couldn't figure out how to make it like a game, because I'm like, you can all just sit around and pretend to be Regency people but there's no rules. And so once I like figured out that, you could do damage to someone's reputation, once I figured that out, it made me really happy to like finish.
I think as well, again, it kind of makes sense that it is kind of like GM-less games, and that kind of the idea that it is kind of like, I guess judged by the players themselves. Because I mean that's as realistic as it gets. It's like you are judged by your peers, and in case for whatever like bout of pettiness that if 3 of them decide you will not win, for whatever reason.
Yeah. Nah, I don't believe this one.
Yeah. No,
I worked really hard on that gossip.
Dude, I must be. I with everything that's been going on, I feel like I've been gossip starved recently. It's there's not been as much office drama because there's been no office.
Oh, there's no office. Yeah, we just went back to the office, and so now I get to be in the middle of office drama again. And I'm like, yes,
get that
the only good part of being here.
So then, I guess, kind of more generally, then over everything you've kind of done, has there been like a particular lesson that had, you had Time Machine, go back to the earlier you?
I think my biggest thing is that like I wish I had known when I was earlier designing that it's okay to design games that I want to play. Like, I don't need to like sit around and worry about if someone else will think this game is fun or if anyone else would want to play this.
Yeah.
Like, if I spending so much time worrying about that and worrying that other people won't find the things that I do to be fun or interesting, got me stuck in this like creative slump of not writing or doing anything because I was like, well, I like this, but that doesn't mean that someone else will.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to sort of like realize and understand that it's okay to write things just because I want to play them, and then maybe someone else will at some point. And also that like my works are much better when they are things that I want to do and not things that I think someone else wants to play.
Yeah, I think you kind of like, it's kind of like two-pronged. It's like, one, obviously when you're doing work that you're like exceedingly kind of passionate about and you're creating the stuff you want to see in the world, obviously that kind of passion bleeds through into the project. And I think there's always that case of like, I think you're always going to be surprised by how many like-minded people there are out there. And it's like, you may think like, this is such a niche idea. Like, I don't think anyone, like, chances are there's probably like again, a good handful of people in that kind of exact same boat as you. I go, finally, this thing that I've been writing about that just doesn't exist now exists.
I was really like surprised and shocked by that kind of like outpouring of support for I Want Your Bite, because I was like, I don't think anyone, because my original concept for it was I had written it as like I had written a really bare bones slimmed down version of this for I'm running Curse of Strahd for my roommates, and we had like a parody session where we played a really pared down version of this, and instead of trying to kill Strahd, they all tried to like romance Strahd.
I mean, in all the ways that a campaign can go off the rails, I think that's yeah.
And so like it did not occur to me that so many folks would want to play my Bachelor game where the Bachelor is a vampire. But when I released it, like folks were like tweeting about it, like I didn't know I wanted this, and I was like, cool.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not very well plugged into the vampire Twitter, but from what I know about they do like marrying and dating vampires.
As a goth who's very plugged into vampire Twitter, you're right.
I don't want to make any assumption about a community I'm not involved in. they're thirsty for it. I don't know. So I guess another thing as well was there any kind of like with like I Want Your Bite in particular, what is like the range of like dating game shows that you took inspiration from?
So I personally have seen one season of The Bachelor, just one. But one of my friends and coworkers who like the two of us do run like the D&D program at the community center that I work at. She loves them. Like Maddie will watch any dating show that comes on because they're hot trash. And so I have osmosed a fair amount of knowledge of different dating game shows because Maddie will come to work and he'll sit down and be like, so I watched this whole new dating show on Netflix last night. I binged it for 8 hours. And so a lot of my like design process, like the game structure, I guess, is based off of the one season of The Bachelor that I wrote.
Nice.
Rather, not that I wrote. Oh, geez.
Wait, I knew it was scripted. I knew
the one season of The Bachelor that I watched, and then all of the like player archetypes and character, like because the subclasses are called archetypes in that, are all based off of like the archetypes of people they cast in reality TV shows.
Yeah.
That I've learned about through osmosis.
I like that. It's kind of interesting seeing like these kind of like real world phenomena that can kind of be distilled down into like, no, okay, they are really they are literally like every season has, you know, this kind of collection of people. There's always going to be like, wow. My only frame of reference for like any sort of dating shows is that there's in the UK, my partner was really interested in something called like Love Island.
Oh,
which is
exactly
how it sounds. They get a bunch of people and they literally like they put them in a villa for about 4 months. Oh, no, not about 4 months. Like it's a long time. Again, it's like and within that villa, they're expected to kind of like couple up. And then at some point, they split the groups up and they introduce more people. There's just honestly, I struggle to keep up because there were like so many people. But yeah, I don't know. It's there is something that is just like that easy entertainment about dating shows. So I can definitely understand why people like want that same easy entertainment for vampires. As I say, did you? So obviously the way the game is kind of structured at the moment is very much like humans kind of seeking the vampire. Had you thought about any kind of like flips on the formula with like a bunch of vampires and one human? I don't know if that...
They all want one human.
Yeah, they've got the good blood.
I hadn't thought of it that way. One of my play testers, because I had some folks play test it, asked me if they could make a hack of the system where it's a bunch of mage students competing to be the like Archmage's new apprentice.
Nice.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's the same concept. There's one fancy person and 5 normal people. But yeah, so I hadn't thought about it backwards. The only like sort of rule variation that I built into the game was I built a vampire hunter secret roles rule set. So at the start of the game, you can choose whether or not you have a vampire hunter. And then the vampire has to like leave the room and not be present while you all decide who the vampire hunter is.
Okay.
And if the vampire hunter wins the game, they kill the vampire instead. So the vampire has to like figure out who the vampire is and make sure they don't win, essentially.
How heartbreaking. That's like I choose you, I love you, and it's like, well, I'm gonna kill you now. that would make an exciting game show, I'm sure. No, not with the killing. Just like a trick.
Yeah, actually, I'm not here for that.
Yeah. Wow. So no, thank you for indulging the weird romance. I don't even know what to call it. Like those romance TV show. Like what
yeah. I think like reality dating shows.
Yeah. That's probably the most. Well, I suppose fantasy dating shows in this sense.
Fantasy dating, yeah.
So I guess kind of I guess kind of looking out more generally then, do you have like any kind of, I guess like dream project or kind of anything that like you would like to kind of put out into the world?
I have a like concept that I have not done anything with, but I'm like holding on to, that is like just a whole system based off of being a traveling magical circus.
Ooh.
And like I want to like build the like playbooks around like the different like circus performers, like trapeze artists and strong folks and people like that. And just have it be that like your circus travels from place to place and sort of deals with whatever like mystical problem is happening there that the people don't know about.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely so much legs to like the idea of like players naturally get kind of associated or attached to any kind of like home base.
Yeah.
And to have like a whole kind of circus that again is their kind of like collaborative kind of creation. And again, the fact that it is traveling kind of lends itself to kind of also anything goes really, I suppose. How I guess in kind of how kind of heavy into kind of like fantasy or like mystery, or is it kind of like a spooky thing? Is it kind of like
sort of like a spooky fantasy kind of thing? I'm a bona fide carnival goth. So I'm really into like dark carnival sort of aesthetics, and so sort of like an even blend of like the fantasy magic side and the like spooky otherness that we as regular people associate with carnivals.
Yeah, I must admit. So, in the UK, we definitely do have some carnivals, but I think I've avoided them. But that's generally just because I okay, I don't know what to call them. You know that it's the only way I could remember is Disneyland. The people in the suits.
Like mascots.
The mascots. Yeah, I don't know. Like I went to Disneyland once and I got chased by Chicken Little, and it went downhill from there.
That's bad.
Yeah, but you know, what can you do? It's funny enough, it's very easy to avoid mascots in a day-to-day life. So thankfully,
yeah, not when you live in California. When like I used to, there were lots of them in California.
Okay, note to self: don't move to California.
Because there are like I don't live there anymore, but there are like 12 amusement parks in California.
Jeez.
And like I lived near like 3 of them, and so they were advertised all the time. So you saw advertisements of the mascots at all times.
I think it's generally the case of like thankfully where I'm at now. I've grown enough to where I'm not like screaming. I can be in the same room with one. I could probably even have a meaningful conversation with one. That I will still feel like that a little bit like any moment if you try and chase me, this is gonna be so I guess kind of like I guess I kind of want to ask like a little bit deeper about like what are like I guess some of the kind of more intriguing aspects of like a carnival that you feel kind of like invoke kind of like a fun adventure, I suppose.
I'm super into found family dynamics, and the base root of a carnival is a found family because generally a lot of the folks that travel with carnivals tend to have like left their home for any given reason. Like I don't know if it's super common in the UK, but it's like quite common here for like children who like in media to be like, I'm having a bad time, I'm running away to the circus. And like so it's kind of like a joke, but in actuality like carnivals are very like welcoming and like safer spaces for folks who are different in any given number of ways. And so like that's the core thing that I love about carnivals. But I also love that like carnivals sort of like celebrate things that are different about people and like people who have different skill sets that like we like a modern capitalistic society doesn't necessarily value.
It's kind of like now you kind of like that. It kind of lends itself to like the idea of like it brings in a bunch of talented individuals who kind of, again, all have their own kind of unique or diverse kind of set of skills that kind of, again, forms into this kind of, which, again, it sounds like the ideal kind of starting party you want in any D&D campaign, to kind of have that from the get-go without any kind of like, why are we all here? Or like, why are we, like, adventure, who knows? No, awesome. No, cool. And then I take it, so it's just kind of, I guess, kind of fleshing out all the different roles there are that you can kind of players can pick, and I guess the typical kind of mysteries or adventures that you get up from place to place. No, awesome. Well then I guess as well, so to kind of stem off from that, do you think it would be kind of like again mainly like a solo project, or do you think it'd be something that you'd kind of
it's something that I want to bring other folks in on, and so like that's why I haven't really gotten very far, because I want to have a solidified like pitch before I like essentially open up like writer applications to get a team together. One, because it's a circus, I want a wide variety of perspectives that I can't necessarily provide as one person. But also because it like I want it to be a fully done like a fully done system. And that sort of thing is something I would rather write with a team than have to write like an entire tabletop rule book by myself.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, and yeah, it kind of lends itself to like again the diversity you want in the carnival itself lends itself to diversity of writers. But that actually again I set myself nicely for the next kind of question then, which is like across the kind of the tabletop RPG kind of community, who are like I guess some of the people that have kind of like continually been sources of inspiration.
I think above all, Persephone or Persephoroth is her like username. Like Sephi is super inspirational to me, and I got to work with her for a very brief time at Action Fiction. She's one of their sensitivity readers, and also did a little bit of writing for the project that I was on, also Chromatic Gamut. And I just like I really admire the like passion and personality she brings to everything, but also the like strength with which she speaks out about being a marginalized person and about making space for marginalized folks at tabletop tables. Because like historically they have not been super like it has not been super diverse as a like field, and also especially optics wise, because a lot of the big tabletop things that we think of when you think about D&D, especially like you think about the Adventure Zone, you think about Critical Role, they're tables of white people who play D&D very by the rules, or like by their home rules if it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And Sephi is really big on sort of like tossing that out and like making space for everyone at her table, and also like letting folks play in a different way. Like her Fast Times D&D podcast, which she is the GM for. They like have homebrewed a lot of things and sort of like house ruled a lot of things to make it a system that is a lot less colonialist and structured the way that D&D is, to sort of like really separate that. And for a similar reason, the other person I really look up to is Connie, who is the GM for Transplanar, which is an all trans D&D stream. And their system is much the same. They have created an entire anti-Orientalist, non-colonialist world, because D&D as a source book is extremely like colonialist and Orientalist, and so as an Asian person, he has built an entire world that allows her to explore different cultures and like highlight them without marginalizing them or making any of them exotified, essentially.
No, I mean, yeah, that's one of the things that, again, as kind of like when you do work with the DMsGuild in particular, and you're working with like the Forgotten Realms kind of existing lore, it doesn't take long to like too much of digging. You do find bodies.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, wow, this one was only 2 feet deep. Wow, that wasn't very challenging.
The Vistani are on the surface.
Yeah, no, this is what I mean. It's kind of it's
just left them out in the field.
Yeah. But no. Again, no, it's kind of fantastic, especially as well. As I always am kind of like inspired by people who kind of take a system, again, a system that they kind of want to play with, and make those kind of like fundamental changes that they want kind of for their table, and particularly when the kind of they are like streaming it. Again, it's kind of nice to kind of it's almost like being able to kind of see behind closed doors, almost. Of like saying like if they weren't streaming, this is how they would home game it, and now we kind of get to see those rules, so therefore they can kind of get out and kind of be propagated. Is that the right word? Or like I don't know, like spread.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, propagated makes it sound too formal. I don't know. No, awesome. Wow. Yeah, and then I'm trying to think of a smooth segue, but I'm all out of them.
It's so fine.
You know what, Rue, I'm just going to generally ask, what are you working on at the moment? And I guess the kind of like my latch-on question is, where can people kind of hear about your work?
So presently, I'm working on the Demiverse, and then some other projects for Action Fiction that we haven't really talked about yet. And then that I can't talk about yet. I should.
I guess it's the difference. Like I haven't spoken about it because I can't.
And then another like private project that I'm working on that isn't mine, but is one of my fellow like friends and designers, Quintastic, is working on a vampire system, and I'm working on doing the playbooks for their vampire system. So I'm like they're doing a lot of the mechanical designs of the and like narrative work, and I'm going to do the playbooks because that's what I'm good at. And then aside from that, I have a couple of like personal things that I have like note documents about the carnival, and then I'm also working on like a paranormal investigator sort of like
Ooh.
short RPG as well that is designed to play at like parties, like
Okay.
2 to 3 hour.
Is it kind of fit within the kind of like the 1-page RPGs, or is it going to be a little? Yeah. No, awesome. Wow. Is it a case of for some of these projects you are just waiting for the lightning again?
Yep. I'm waiting for the lightning and the time.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Fall is a really busy season for me because I'm also a semi-professional cosplayer. So I have a lot of in the Pacific Northwest, like all of our cons and competitions are in fall.
Oh, okay.
And so it's like I would love to be writing right now, but I have to build the tentacle monstrosity.
I was gonna say, I was like, wow, that's a really that's a curious example to pull out, but I don't think it's an example. I think you're actually building like a tentacle costume.
Oh yeah, I am. I'm building the final boss from this past season of Critical Role.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Fair. Yeah, again, yeah, you do need some tentacles for that.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, Rue, thank you so much for joining me. We've done it again. An hour has flown by. We've survived. And yeah, no, I can't thank you enough for spending some time to kind of chat.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, and then I forgot to answer your other question, which is to hear news about me. You can find me on Twitter as @IlanaKnight13. And I release games on itch as just Ilana Knight, no 13.
Like I said, so again, for the people watching or listening, there'll be links to those in descriptions always. Otherwise, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I believe I've got a product out at the moment that I collaborated on, which is like Children of the Fae. I did, we did some with the new D&D hardcover adventure book. Sven Treckenbrought brought a bunch of cool people together and was trying to kind of create some cool stuff about some of the creatures of Feywild. I got to write all about goblinoids, which is always fun. Awesome. Just goblins hitting each other with sticks, having fun, wacky stuff. So there'll be links to that in the description. But other than that, Rue, my favorite question, my most important question, how do you end a podcast?
I'm going to take a page out of my book from when I entered the last interview that I did and say, I'm probably going to go take a nap. That's how I'm going to end the podcast.
Same.